Sean McVay revealed on Wednesday that if Matthew Stafford was not back in LA, Aaron Rodgers was a real possibility. And that gave us an idea, and it's truly a what if around the NFL over the years. NFL Spotlight starts now. Welcome in. It is the Thursday, June 12th edition of the NFL Spotlight Show. I am your host, Ari Meirov. A very quieter Wednesday around the NFL compared to Tuesday. We did have some news, some little things. Jermaine Pratt, who was released by the Bengals, has already found a new home in Las Vegas. But other than that, players still on the field. Mandatory minicamp day 2. It's wrapping up here today. But some interesting things came out from Rams head coach Sean McVay, and that gave me and Ben an idea. Let me bring in my good friend Ben Allen. Ben, what is going on? It's good to see you. A little bit of a fun topic here today.
Yeah, and before we get into the depths of all of what we talked about in the cold open of the what ifs could have happened around the NFL, let's actually talk about what Sean McVay said, because it was teed up by Kyle Brandt of Good Morning Football. And he basically just asked, like, hey, like, we had heard, like, maybe there were some rumors that you guys would be interested in Aaron Rodgers if Matthew Stafford had, say, gone to the Raiders, to the Giants, if a contract hadn't been worked out. Of course, it ended up being a moot point because they did get a deal in place. But he asked him, like, how real was this? And McVay was like, yeah, we definitely would have considered bringing him in if we hadn't gotten a deal out with Stafford. So what would that have looked like, you think, if, let's play this hypothetical, if Aaron Rodgers had become the quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams?
You know, Ben, there are so many of these every single offseason. Not everything actually gets revealed. Some of it finally gets revealed. Like after a player retires, we find out, like, yeah, I was considering this. And it's like the ripple effects of if he actually did that would have been crazy around the NFL. We're going to go through some here in a minute. But the Aaron Rodgers one is very interesting because we had so much quarterback movement this offseason. At the very beginning of the offseason, there were some serious rumblings around the NFL about Matthew Stafford's future in LA. And as we all know, he got permission to seek a trade, find a contract with another team. The Giants and Rams were interested, and the Giants and Raiders, I should say, were interested. And the Rams were kind of in limbo, waiting for the agent, Jimmy Sexton, to get back with a decision. And the reality is the Raiders and the Giants had multi-year offers with fully guaranteed money, much better contract than what the Rams ended up giving Matthew Stafford. But Stafford, his wife, 4 kids, LA, Sean McVay, they decided not to leave. But the ripple effects, had they have gone, let's just pretend they end up with the Raiders. That means Aaron Rodgers most likely ends up with the Rams, 1 year, $10 million. So he's in LA. Stafford is with the Raiders, let's just say. That means Geno Smith does not have a home. As a result, Geno might still be in Seattle on a contract he probably didn't want to do, but he had no other place to go because Pete Carroll does not need him. As a result, where is Sam Darnold right now? Is he maybe back in Minnesota on that 1-year deal that they offered him? That means J.J. McCarthy is not a starting quarterback. There are so many ripple effects to this. And of course, what is going on in Pittsburgh? Who's going to be their quarterback? Because as a result, Aaron Rodgers is not there. They were never bringing back Russell Wilson. Justin Fields already made up his mind he's going to the Jets. We could be in a situation right now where it's like, where are the Steelers turning to? Maybe that is where Kirk Cousins ends up if all of this happens. So the what ifs with just a simple decision like that of Stafford going back to LA had ripple effects around a bunch of quarterbacks here around the NFL. You could do the same thing if Stafford doesn't go to the Raiders but ends up with the Giants. That's the whole thing with Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. Or do they actually pick Jackson Dart? There are so many moving parts over here about all of this if that would have happened. And I think when Rodgers said 1 year, $10 million, he was telling it to every team. But I think he really was focused on the Rams, who really are not looking to pay significant money to a quarterback on a year-to-year basis. They obviously got Matthew Stafford back, but that is only a 1-year deal of no more fully guaranteed money after this year. So that would have been appeasing to the Rams if that would have been the case. But obviously the Rams are very happy with Stafford being back. And that is how the quarterback dominoes ended up falling this offseason with Rodgers ending up in Pittsburgh. And of course, Geno now in Vegas and Sam Darnold in Seattle and J.J. McCarthy being the starter in Minnesota. So it's just a what-if game that happens every single offseason, and this is a great example of it.
Yeah, well, and that leads us to what our main discussion is going to be because it sparked our brains of like, man, that would have been crazy. But like, there's a lot of those moments that what if could have happened. We'll talk about some of them here, but let's go ahead and start with one that was actually pretty close. And I think it has to do with the New Orleans Saints legend, right?
Yeah, this is one of the great ones, and it's been a story for many years because there are so many ripple effects to it. But the mid 2000s, Drew Brees, people kind of don't remember, especially this new age of fans. Drew Brees actually started his career with the San Diego Chargers, with a second round pick by them. They end up drafting Philip Rivers. They have Philip Rivers on the bench for 1 year. Drew Brees starts another season, and it would have been a complicated decision for the Chargers about do we keep Drew Brees, who's an impending free agent, but in week 17 of that final year in San Diego, he suffers a nasty shoulder injury. I've watched it many times. It like hurts to watch. And it was a very, very significant injury. And as a result, the Chargers were like, all right, you have a serious injury. We have Philip Rivers waiting. You can walk as a free agent. And that ended up with a fascinating situation where Sean Payton, of course, is the head coach in New Orleans. But meanwhile, the head coach in Miami is none other than Nick Saban. Yes, Nick Saban was the head coach in the NFL for a couple of years with the Miami Dolphins. And the first choice for Drew Brees was the Miami Dolphins. And he goes there, goes to take a physical, goes to be with the doctors. As the story goes, and really, there have been conflicting stories on this, but the story that Nick Saban tells everybody is that the doctors told him, we do not recommend signing Drew Brees. And as a result, they decided not to sign Drew Brees and instead traded for Dante Culpepper, who was basically done already in the NFL. And instead, Drew Brees, of course, ends up with the New Orleans Saints. And the ripple effects of that is unbelievable. I mean, you could think about so many different things. First of all, where on earth would Nick Saban be right now if Drew Brees was actually in Miami? Would Drew Brees actually turn out to be the Drew Brees that we knew, who had a Hall of Fame career? That means Nick Saban maybe has a longer stay in the NFL. Maybe that means the Patriots are now winning the AFC East so easily every single year. All those national titles at Alabama, where does that go? Or is Alabama going to be the powerhouse they end up becoming? And of course, the Sean Payton, who became a unbelievable head coach in New Orleans, what is his solution there with the Saints and finding a quarterback in? For people to remember, the Saints at that time, not the best organization in the world because they were coming off Katrina. They were having a lot of things going on within the organization, being a losing team. So it would not have been easy. And if he does not find the quarterback, how long is he actually the head coach? And of course, we know they win a Super Bowl and they have a lot of regular season success over the years with Drew Brees. So the ripple effects of that is never ending as well. I mean, there are so many layers to that, and a simple physical, which I totally understand that the shoulder injuries are hard, and that injury, watching it, it's like that looks awful. But obviously he came through. He ended up being healthy from it, and he had an unbelievable career with the Saints. And the Dolphins kind of ended up in quarterback purgatory for a very, very long time. And until really Tua came along, they never really had an answer.
Another one of those what ifs. Quarterbacks are always fun to do the what ifs with, particularly when it becomes a guy that's going to be a Hall of Famer. So I don't know. What you got next?
Well, I'm going to stick to the Hall of Famers here, and I'm actually going to go to Tom Brady here next. And Tom Brady, when he became a free agent and the Patriots were ended up saying sayonara, and we had an unbelievable run with 6 Super Bowls. It's shocking to think about, but I know he was in his 40s, but only 2 teams had significant interest, really 3, but ended up being with 2. It was the Raiders who were in initially, and as the story goes, John Gruden decided not to pursue it all the way. And then there are the other 2 teams that were in it were the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who of course got him, and the Los Angeles Chargers as well. And for whatever reason, those 2 teams were the ones that were in it, but Tampa Bay definitely pushed harder. Bruce Arians, the GM, Jason Light. We had John Spytek here on the show a few weeks ago. He was a very big part of that. There's a great article on The Athletic with Dan Pompei, who writes about the entire operation they went through to make sure they get Tom Brady as their quarterback. But the other team involved was the Chargers. And of course, we know that the Bucs won a Super Bowl in year 1 right away. Had he have gone to the AFC West, he would have been in the same division, of course, with Patrick Mahomes. But what makes it a very bigger story here is that year the Chargers had the number 6 overall pick in the draft. And as a result of not getting Tom Brady, they end up selecting Justin Herbert. So the future there is a very interesting one as well, because if Brady ends up in LA, it's safe to say Justin Herbert is not in LA, and that would be the situation with him. And you could think of all the people who were with the Chargers during that time. First of all, they had a really, really good offense with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Austin Eckler, and I believe Melvin Gordon was still there. So there were some good players on that team. The defense, of course, had Joey Bosa and Derwin James when they were in their prime and young. Derwin James is still a good player right now, but there were a lot of really good pieces there. And of course, had Tom have gone there, they would now use a quarterback pick at number 6. And I think they probably would have brought in Rob Gronkowski as well, because of course he ended up over in Tampa Bay. So the ripple effects of all of that is also a very, very interesting one. Who ends up in Tampa Bay if Tom is not there? The other free agents that offseason, I know there was a Phillip Rivers who was out there, who ended up in Indianapolis. Do they bring back Jameis Winston, who had 30 interceptions the year before? What do they do? Because they were feeling the pressure at the time. We all look at the Buccaneers right now as this amazing, great organization, and they really are. They have amazing people there and really good players, but they really couldn't figure out the quarterback position, which could have had a lot of question on the future of some people there. So the ripple effect of that one is also a very interesting one. And I've posed this question on X in the past, but as if you're a Chargers fan, would you have preferred 3 years of Tom Brady and a guaranteed Super Bowl win, or 15, 17, 18 years of Justin Herbert, but you have no idea what's going to happen during those 18 years? And I remember asking that on X, and there were mixed results there. I mean, some of them were like, you never say no to a Super Bowl. Others were like, I'll take the bet of 18 years of a quarterback, and I think we'll get one at some point. So it's a very, very fun conversation to have over there with what could have been with Tom Brady. But those were the two teams who were mostly involved with the Tom Brady sweepstakes a few years ago.
Yeah, what do you think? Do you think with that roster, the way it was constructed, that the Chargers actually could have become the Buccaneers, in the sense that, like, yeah, they got those guys to want to come in. Maybe they get Gronk. Like, does that become a Super Bowl contending team?
I mean, I think they would have. I mean, the Chiefs were just starting. They obviously just won their first Super Bowl there over the 49ers that year. But the rest of the AFC West, the Raiders were nothing amazing. The Broncos were okay. But this was a division that would have been wide open. And keep in mind, the year Tom Brady won the Super Bowl in Tampa Bay, they did not win the division. They actually finished second place that year. They were a wild card team. The Saints won the division. So even if the Chiefs would have won the AFC West, they could have still gotten in as a wild card team. And with Tom, you never know. The Buccaneers that year beat the Commanders and Taylor Heineke in a playoff game. Then they beat the Saints in the divisional round. Then they beat the Packers in the NFC Championship game, in that game where Matt LaFleur decided to kick a field goal when they probably should have went for it. And then, of course, in the Super Bowl, he beats none other than Patrick Mahomes. So I think the Chargers would have been a really, really potentially good team. The coaching staff there back then was Anthony Lynn and Tom Telesco as the GM. So that would have been interesting if it's not Bruce Arians, of course. But roster-wise, they were in a good position. I think they would have competed for a possible Super Bowl, something they have not done in a very, very long time.
All right, quarterbacks are fun, Ari, but who do you have next? What's your almost what if? What happened?
Yeah, let's go to a more recent one. And we've kind of talked about this a lot on the show, but the 2023 NFL draft. And this really goes back to the end of the 2022 NFL season, week 18 of that year. The Texans have the number 1 pick locked up. It's theirs. They lose week 18 to the Colts. It's theirs. End of story. Lovie Smith, who knew he was getting fired, was like, we're going out to win. And at the very end of that game versus the Colts in that week 18 game, it's Davis Mills throwing this crazy 4th down pass, which is caught by Jordan Akins for a touchdown. The Texans win. As a result, the Bears have the number 1 overall pick now. And essentially, because the Colts lost, they also move up to the number 4 overall pick in this draft. And you go to that draft, number 1 pick, the Bears were like, we're not picking. We're going to trade down. And they trade down with the Carolina Panthers down to number 9. Carolina now gets the number 1 overall pick. And number 2, Houston, instead of having number 1, they're number 2 now. They take CJ Stroud. Carolina takes Bryce Young. Indy, because they have the number 4 overall pick now, they take Anthony Richardson. And I've said this before. I'll say it again. First of all, Bryce Young, it looks like he's going to be a good quarterback in this league. But last year at this time, we had a lot of questions. CJ Stroud looked like he was going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. if the Texans were picking number one, had they lost that game, they were taking Bryce Young. I could tell you that confidently right now. So because they win that Week 18 game, they fall to number two. As a result, CJ Stroud is the guy that falls to them. And for what it's worth, they were having a big debate in that room about, do we take Stroud? Do we take Will Anderson? Of course, they ended up just trading up to number three, and they get both players. But as a result, because of that game, all of that happens. Bryce is in Carolina. We obviously have CJ in Houston. We have Anthony Richardson in Indy. And of course, the Bears trade out the very next year. The number one overall pick goes to the Carolina Panthers. And of course, that pick belonged to Chicago from that Bryce Young trade. That becomes Caleb Williams. So that one game in Week 18, Lovie Smith winning the game because he knew he has nothing to lose over here. He's not going to be the future head coach. That had ripple effects around the NFL. Because of it, CJ's in Houston. Because of it, Bryce Young right now is in Carolina. And of course, Caleb Williams, as a result, is in Chicago, which he would not have been if not for that Week 18 game. So the ripple effects are crazy. And if Anthony Richardson ever becomes something, that Week 18 loss is also because the Colts ended up at number 4 by losing that game. So those ripple effects of a bunch of different quarterbacks moving around, it's one that's very, very memorable.
Yeah, I put screwing up on the bar down here. It really was just a final, I don't want to say F you, but Lovie Smith had a little bit of extra fun there going out saying, you know what? If we're going to go out, let's go out guns a-blazing. Let's make everything absolute chaos. I have nothing but respect for that.
A Chicago legend, built a statue, took them to the Super Bowl, got them the number one overall pick. I mean, Lovie Smith, Chicago legend for sure.
I mean, an entire defense named after him, essentially, right? You know, you get the
Yeah,
Tampa
I
2.
mean, he's one of those rare 3-time NFL head coaches. We don't have many of those.
True.
Yeah.
Albeit one was a very, very short stint for this reason. Well, it was going to be gone no matter what, but still, it's that's a what if. What if Lovie Smith had been given another year with the Houston Texans?
Yeah, that would have been no DeMeco Ryans. How about that? But let's go to our next one here with I like this one because this one really hasn't been reported much. I mentioned it on a podcast a couple years ago. I forgot which one it was, but the Philadelphia Eagles a few years ago, they were looking for another receiver, and they were gonna get one. It was very important to them, and their first attempt was, we're gonna trade for Calvin Ridley from the Atlanta Falcons. And Howie gives a call to Terry Fontenot, is like, hey, I know Calvin missed some time at the end of last year. It was some personal reasons, but we're willing to take him on. What is, the competition here? Let's work out a deal. They start talking. The very next day, Terry calls Howie and essentially says, listen, I know we're talking about this trade. We want to get it done. We have to end it. We can't do it right now. And Howie was like, what happened? Like, what's going on? He's like, I can't really talk about it, but something happened. A few weeks later, we find out Calvin Ridley is suspended for a full year for betting on NFL games. That's why it was shut down. So Philly pivots. They decide we're going to go into free agency, and we're going to sign one of the top free agents available that offseason, and that was Allen Robinson. He was in Chicago for a very long time, finally made it to the free agent market. He was waiting for it, wanted a big deal. He essentially had a deal done with the Eagles. Howie had a deal done. The night before, Sean McVay gets on the phone with him, and Sean, we know Sean, when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to convincing, he might be the best person in the NFL. Calls Allen Robinson, is like, listen, come to LA. We just won a Super Bowl. OBJ tore his ACL. We need somebody else next to Cooper Kupp. You could be that guy. You'll play with Matthew Stafford. He gets him to flip his decision. It was not leaked or announced that he's signing with Philly, but in league circles, it was known. And as a result, he ends up signing with the LA Rams. And now Howie, needing another receiver, does not know what to do, looking around the NFL, calling teams, trying to find out what's going on. And lo and behold, as a result, comes draft night that year, A.J. Brown becomes available. And we know what happens from there. The Eagles trade their first-round pick. They get A.J. Brown, and A.J. Brown turns out to be a megastar in Philadelphia. Of course, they win the Super Bowl this past year. He's already been extended again, so he's already gotten 2 extensions since ending up in Philadelphia. And that's a great what-if because the Eagles wanted to get Calvin Ridley, who was about to get suspended, and they wanted to get Allen Robinson, who ended up in LA and was a complete disappointment there. They traded him away after 1 year. I believe it was to Pittsburgh, and that was that. And, of course, Philly is hailed for an unbelievable trade of getting AJ Brown out of Tennessee. As a result, there's shuffling in Tennessee with their GM getting fired. Eventually, Mike Vrabel is fired. It's all a big mess. And of course, Jalen Hurts has AJ Brown as a result. So that is another great what if, and a lot of ripple effects with that one as well, with a bunch of different teams.
You think the Tennessee Titans wish they could take back that trade?
I think they wish Calvin Ridley, who is now a Tennessee Titan, did not actually get suspended, because had he not, he would be an Eagle. And who knows what happens with AJ Brown? Maybe they get a deal done. You never know. But that was the end of that.
Okay, I have to ask you because I have a feeling it's coming up soon. We got to talk about Antonio Brown. He's on this list, right?
Antonio Brown is on this list, and this was a very fun one and a very confusing one. So we knew Antonio Brown was done with the Steelers. His ending in Pittsburgh, he had an unbelievable career there. He was awesome, but he gets into a fight with Ben Roethlisberger. He's kicking footballs during practice. He's getting into it with Mike Tomlin. It was known this relationship is over. He and his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, they get permission to get out of Pittsburgh, and essentially it's time to trade him. And this was before we all knew Antonio Brown was a little bit of a distraction, I would say. The ability of Mike Tomlin to keep all of that under control for so many years, kudos to him. It's what makes him so great. But we go into this entire offseason waiting for this trade to happen. And there were several teams who would make sense from a need standpoint, a financial standpoint. Like, there were a bunch of teams. And it was a late, I don't know what night it was, but a very late night. It gets reported, I think it was NFL Network, who reports Antonio Brown was getting traded to the Buffalo Bills. And it was like, whoa, it's happening. Here it is. And everybody goes crazy. And it's like, this was when Josh Allen was still no Josh Allen. This was when everybody thought he had accuracy issues. Everybody thought Antonio Brown would literally like go nuts if he ends up in Buffalo. And that's actually what ends up happening. Now, Brandon, there was never a trade agreement in place because Antonio Brown never wanted to go to Buffalo, but it was reported as if the deal was getting done. And essentially, Antonio Brown literally tells Buffalo, I am not showing up. I'm not reporting. I'm not coming. Do not do it. Rosenhaus, it's unclear if he ever had an actual extension in place in Buffalo. But as soon as Brandon Beane finds out that Antonio is not coming, he canceled the deal, throws it off. And the next morning, it was chaos because I think ESPN Schefter goes on air and says there was never a deal in place. NFL Network has to retract it. It was a whole thing going on. And of course, a few weeks later, what we end up happening is Antonio Brown gets traded to the Raiders. I think it was a third-round pick and a fifth-round pick. And what ends up happening there is absolute chaos. Mike Mayock, the great draft analyst from NFL Network at the time, was the GM of the Las Vegas Raiders, and he gets into it with Antonio Brown. There was the frozen feet thing. There was a helmet thing with Antonio Brown. There was him calling Mike Mayock a cracker. There were so many crazy things going on throughout all of it. And eventually, Antonio Brown, before a week 1 Monday Night Football game, gets released by the Raiders. He finds out there's a viral video of him jumping into a pool saying, I'm free, Grandma, I'm free. And then eventually he gets signed by the Patriots, is there for a week, catches a touchdown versus Miami, and then he's cut from there as well with a bunch of off-the-field stuff going on. But Buffalo not getting him and not completing that trade, as a result, leads them to Stephon Diggs the next offseason, and they trade for him. And, of course, Stephon and Josh Allen became a pretty good duo there in Buffalo for the amount of time it lasted. But Antonio Brown, that entire offseason, the stuff that he went through, I'm probably missing like 100 things that he did there with the Raiders. He was there. He wasn't there. That team that year, I remember they had Richie Incognito and Vontaze Burfict, and John Gruden was there, and Brown was there. It was all the characters you could think of were all on one team. And he, of course, gets cut before week 1 of that season. But that was a crazy one as well.
That whole Raiders team could be its own what if we had done this like squad potential. I just remember that being absolutely one stack team, and we never got to see it. So maybe one day we can maybe there'll be like real generators one day where we can like run AI to like really see it in more than just like a Madden thing. But maybe it's already out there. I don't know. You got one more, right, Ari?
Yeah, I got one more, which is it's a cool one. I don't remember who told over this story. It might have been Schefter, but I always appreciate it. I thought it was really cool. But the way the story goes, and actually it was Schefter, but he says he was on the phone with the Rams and the 49ers before this draft, I have to go back to check what year it was. I believe this would be 2018, if I'm not mistaken, or 2017 draft. And he spoke to both of them. And essentially, the Rams told him that, hey, like, or the 49ers, excuse me, told him, like, hey, we love this tight end, Gerald Everett. Like, he's a really, really good tight end. We're really, really excited about him if we get him in our pick. And the Rams call Schefter as well. And they're like, Adam, like, there's this tight end in this draft, Gerald Everett. We love him. And Adam keeps his trust between both teams, does not let them know that the other teams are interested in the other. And essentially, he's like, let's see what happens here in the draft. And eventually, the Rams have the pick first, and they take Gerald Everett there in the middle of that draft. As a result, the 49ers lose their tight end of their choice. That was their guy. That's who they wanted. And eventually, in the 5th round, they decide we're going to draft this other tight end out of Iowa, and his name was George Kittle. So George Kittle ending up in San Francisco and becoming one of the very best tight ends in football. That was not their option one. Gerald Everett, both NFC West teams wanted him. Of course, the Rams got him, and as a result, they just took a different tight end a couple rounds later in George Kittle, not expecting him to become what he, of course, became. And immediately as a rookie, George Kittle started to produce. And as the years went on, he became one of the very best tight ends in football. Just this offseason, got another very well-deserved extension, becoming the highest paid tight end in football, one of the very best character guys in football, just a very, very fun person to be around, the leader with the team. And it's just a great story between two NFC West rivals who both wanted the very same player. One of those teams got that player, but the other team who wanted that player ended up with somebody else. And over the years, Kittle has dominated, including games versus those Los Angeles Rams. So I always love that story just because it was two rivals in the same division. The whole reporter aspect of it, of just keeping it between you and nobody else and not letting the other team know, I always found that to be a very unique one. And Kittle ending up in San Francisco as a 5th round pick and becoming what he became, that's not what they were expecting. And of course, he became something really, really special.
Oh my, all the what ifs. I know we talked about a few other ones. There was like the whole thing if Aaron Rodgers was actually going to be traded for Randy Moss. What about a fun one? What if Eli Manning had never forced his way out? And you've got a different quarterback there in New York. You think the Giants end up winning some Super Bowls there still?
The situation would have been, as the story goes, and the NFL Films crew did an exceptional job talking about this '04 draft. Had Eli Manning actually gone to the Chargers, number one overall pick, the Giants would not have picked Philip Rivers. Their choice, their GM Ernie Accorsi, his choice was Ben Roethlisberger. He was fine with him. So Ben would have been the number 4 pick to the Giants, and then number 11, the Steelers would have taken Philip Rivers. So that would have been the situation. That's another really good one, Ben, that I kind of forgot about, and it's a amazing one. Yeah. So Eli, of course, his father Archie does not want to go to San Diego. They never really fully explained why it was. There's many different conspiracy theories out there. Did not want to go to San Diego. They were not an amazing organization at the time. Never really had much winning. And of course, his brother Peyton also was in the AFC at the time. So there were many different things over there. But his father and the agent, Tom Condon, a week or a few days before the draft, tell the Chargers we're not going to negotiate a number 1 overall pick contract. And again, back then, like we've spoken about, Ben, those contracts were actually negotiated. It was not slotted. So they were like, we're not coming to the table to talk. And of course, the Chargers pick him. The Giants at number 4, having an inkling that maybe, just maybe, the Chargers are going to negotiate a trade if we take Philip Rivers, who they liked, who they coached at the Senior Bowl. They take Philip Rivers, not knowing for sure that a trade would go through. It was a risk by Ernie Accorsi back then. But eventually they do this trade. They give him a future first-round pick, which turns out to become Sean Merriman as well. But of course, Eli Manning wins 2 Super Bowls with the Giants. Philip Rivers has a very, very great career, but no any Super Bowls there in San Diego and LA. And of course, Ben ends up in Pittsburgh at number 11 instead of number 4, and he wins 2 Super Bowls in Pittsburgh as well. So it's a great question. I don't have an answer what would have happened. What Eli did those 2 Super Bowls, I feel like only Eli could have done that, because it was just some of the most special things, the getting out of the sack, the throw to Manningham, the runs that he had. It was pretty cool. I always give Eli credit, because think about Eli. Throughout the course of his career, he never had a Hall of Fame player on offense, ever. Think about that. So yeah. So
Wow. I've
it's
never actually thought about that. You mean Ahmad
And I
Bradshaw's not going to the Hall of Fame?
No, not Tiki Barber. I know Rondé wants him to get in, but no. Think about all the players he's had. He never had a Hall of Fame player on offense, and I think defensively the only one he really had was Michael Strahan. So, yeah, from that I know people try to pick holes on Eli. Yes, he did not have the most perfect career in the world, but those two runs that he had, everyone should say, "Oh, the defense was great." The defense was not like the most amazing thing ever. It was Eli doing a lot of really, really special things those 2 years, and I feel like nobody else could have done what Eli did those 2 years. It was something very, very special.
If any of you, our viewers and listeners, have any other favorite moves that almost happened that you guys know of, make sure to drop them in the comments here on YouTube. Respond to them to the post on Ari's X feed. Just tweet them directly at us. Let us know what we missed. There's a lot out there we discussed, off camera too. Like, man, this one's true, but it's like, how close did it actually get and stuff? These ones you went through, they were close. They were definitely close. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the YouTube, Apple, Spotify. We've got a lot coming up. We knocked out a few more guests today for NFL Spotlight guests. They're exciting. I'll tell you what.
Could we tease that we had a current GM once again? Can we do that?
Yes. Yeah. Let's say that. It's well, you can say it better than I can, but there's another GM on the way.
We're looking forward to it. It is a NFC GM, so there is a hint for you. We had AFC GM with John Spytek a couple of weeks ago. We're moving over to the NFC side, and maybe we'll give a little more of a tease here tomorrow as we wrap up the week here on NFL Spotlight. We will see you all then.